This is your last chance. After this...
Or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
That is a nice boulder.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you pre-recorded from two undersized apartments in New York City, it's Revenge of the Film Nerds.
There, we're in a tight spot.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
With your hosts, BlackKrystel.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
And Jack Manley.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
A podcast for nerds by nerds.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Failure is not an option.
And now, here are your hosts, BlackKrystel and Jack Manley.
Hello, what is up, guys? It's your girl, BK, and I am here with the one, the only, my man, Jack, to bring you the Revenge of the Film Nerds.
We are delighted to have you guys in here. This is a project that BK and I have been working on for a little bit to get up and running, and we're really excited to bring it out for you. It sort of started because we kind of discovered by accident that we are both, in our own way, film nerds. Isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely, which is kind of weird because I feel like it's been a while since we've had time to do things like this, talk and geek out about movies and films and just be able to put each other on. So buckle up because I think we're about to get really into it with today's film.
Absolutely. As we are going to start, we figured for a pilot, what better way to bring it in than one of the seminal creations in American cinema in one of the best eras, the 1970s. And that film is the horror sci-fi progenitor, the original. It's Alien, folks, directed by Ridley Scott in 1979. Now, BK, I know that you have a lot of personal affinity for this film. You saw this for the first time when you were pretty young, am I right?
Yeah, my mom, thankfully, very interesting connection there, discovered one day, was talking about it, was like, you never heard of these? Went to Blockbuster, got them, and it was binged there from the start. I can't even...
Oh, wow.
I don't even remember how old I was.
So you were watching this in the era of Blockbuster.
Yes, Blockbuster era.
That's say half our listeners aren't even going to know what Blockbuster is, except that, you know, millennials lament its demise.
Absolutely. Oh man, but it was such a great experience. Honestly, being a kid, really, this is the first time I'd ever seen some sort of cinematic work with such a female lead, let alone in the spoopy horror genre. So, my God, was I traumatized and also inspired? Yes.
And we will definitely get into those themes as we open the discussion. But it's interesting to hear from somebody who did get a chance to grow up with this film, because I was very much in sort of the fantasy sci-fi stuff when I was growing up. I was more towards Star Wars and that sort of content. So I didn't get Alien until after I had already gotten into film school and was going through the curriculum there. Is that, folks, by the way, is where I get my film nerdiness from, is I did the whole film school circuit, 4 years at NYU. Goes to show how much I know that I'm not working in the industry, but it did do a lot to teach me about film and film criticism, which is something that I really love to get into. And Alien was one of those films I saw at sort of the peak of my attention towards film that really shocked me and left an indelible impression. Is one thing that will become very clear the more episodes we have, is I have this immense respect for the filmmaking of the 1970s, this period called New Hollywood.
New Hollywood.
Yes, indeed. But New Hollywood was this period between 1967 and 1980 in which the inmates kind of ran the asylum, in which the studio executives were very deferential to the creatives in the process. And as a result, we got some of the most expressive and most profoundly unique films in American history during that 13-year stretch. And Alien is certainly no exception to that. So we're going to get into it right now. We're both going to talk about it from our different perspectives on it. We're going to talk about some of the great aspects of it. But I think the most important thing we can do right now is to sort of set the stage a little bit with the sort of the background on this. Now, Alien it started out as a lot of very different cultural influences that were very spread out in the sci-fi scene, but that came together.
Right. Isn't this like a amalgamation of like a lot of different influences? I know you're literally about to go off on this, so I'm geeking because sidebar fam who's listening, like Jack's over here like, I'm adding references to our notes list, and I'm looking and I'm like, oh, he went off. So I am so hyped to hear this because some of the stuff I didn't know watching it, and I've seen the film like a bunch of times.
The Google search bar is a wonderful thing, BK.
Oh, put me on, man.
But yeah, so the thing about Alien that's so significant is that it came from a lot of dedication to sci-fi and a lot of previous projects that initially amalgamated into this one real cultural hallmark that we all reference. It was written initially by a writer named Dan O'Bannon, who is still the writer of the final film. Is when he was at film school at the University of Southern California, he, along with John Carpenter, did a film called Dark Star. Now, Dark Star was kind of an alien comedy, a sci-fi comedy almost. In fact, the alien in their film was just a painted beach ball.
You're kidding.
Dead to rights. If that doesn't give you an insight into John Carpenter's creation process, nothing will.
My God. Oh, man. Okay. So, but then how does that evolve, right? Like comedy parody, alien beach ball to most iconic film of like literally the 80s and pre-80s, like the golden era. How?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the word iconic there because the Alien really owes a lot of its production to probably the most iconic failed film of all time, Jodorowsky's Dune. For those of you who don't know, Alejandro Jodorowsky was a very experimental film director from Mexico who did certain films such as El Topo and Holy Mountain and Santa Sangre, which are great films in their own right. But his real passion project, particularly in the 60s, was to do the novel Dune as a film adaptation. And he brought in, you should really look this story up if you can, folks, because it is a fascinating process and how all of these great creators in Hollywood came together and then fell apart. But Dan O'Bannon was one of the people who got pulled onto this production. And through that, he met several of the people who would end up working on the technical aspects of Alien, including an artist that you may be familiar with by the name of H.R. Geiger, who is the sort of godfather, as we'll get into, of this film's set design, the guy who gives the real air to its film. And so when Dune collapsed, O'Bannon and a lot of these creators of the practical effects, these people who were into the design of the film.
The good peeps, the peeps we love and adore.
Absolutely. Well, it's like any creative process. If you work on something with somebody and you like their vibe, you try to stay with them and you try to stick with them in your creativity. And that is exactly what happened here, is they continued to work on this and continued to sort of really indulge in what was Dan O'Bannon's deep desire to one day do an alien film that was actually serious. Like he had enjoyed the Dark Star experience, but he really wanted to get into something serious with the concept of an alien. And so that was where we get to memory, which was the first essential part of the Alien script. It was just about the first 30 minutes of the film, believe it or not. It was a quick little story about a crew being woken up in the middle of a journey in space because it had received a signal and then crashing on the planet where the signal was originating.
Oh, okay.
O'Bannon critically hadn't really come up with the antagonist yet. He didn't have an idea of what the machinations of that world were going to be. And so he started delving into everything sci-fi he could, including a lot of references to filmmaking in the 1950s. One thing Dan O'Bannon likes to famously say about the Alien is, I didn't steal it from anyone, I stole it from everyone. He included references from things as far apart as The Thing from Another Planet, Forbidden Planet, Planet of the Vampires. So these were all, like Planet of the Vampires in particular is where he gets the image of the gigantic alien inside the spaceship on the crashed planet. It was a big conglomeration of just bringing in these sci-fi tropes and bringing in these images that had been used in a very unserious way in B Hollywood in the 1950s and bringing them into a more serious context.
Almost like making that realism, because a lot of these things, like I feel like back in the day, now I know you're the expert on this, but back in the day, like fun, like, oh, vampires were always laughed at. Like I feel like, like space and aliens was always like LOL. And then when Alien came out, it really was just like that turning point of like, look, these types of themes can be taken very realistically and very seriously and very believable. And I feel like that really kind of gets us into like a lot of things that we're going to be going off on today.
Oh, no, absolutely. That was one of the things that they really dealt with when they were going through the process in Hollywood. The initial reaction was fairly mixed to what we now consider to be a great film, because Hollywood and the film criticism apparatus that existed at the time was not used to having to take sci-fi seriously. And if anything, they had only just really started to appreciate the genre and how it could have a cultural impact, because Alien had come out 2 years after Star Wars. And so that was really maybe the only frame of reference these people had for an A sci-fi. Because until that point, you're absolutely right. In the 1950s, you would be much more likely to see today on Mystery Science Theater than you would be able to see it in its original form.
And that's so interesting. That's very interesting. Like, can you imagine, guys, for 1 second being like, okay, the only other reference of sci-fi I have in my brain is Star Wars, and the next thing I see is Alien. My God, man. that's a big jump, man. I'd feel bad for those critics who really had to like deal with that kind of like exposure. That's honestly traumatic, personally.
I mean, it's a hard frame of reference to develop, because sci-fi is so ubiquitous, in part because of this film, that we are inured to the tropes of sci-fi, and we're inured in a certain way to the tropes of horror. But the way that this movie introduced the melding of those concepts is really quite novel and quite profound for the time period at which it happened. But I think, BK, and this is something that you have been very enthusiastic to speak on, I think probably the most interesting aspect of the background on this film is the sort of the birth of the main character. From all of our research on this film, whether it was at the process of being memory or whether it was the original script Star Beast that originally had its name, that finally had its name changed to Alien and had Ridley Scott signed on to it, Ripley didn't really exist. In fact, in the creation of the script, Dan O'Bannon had insisted on having very generically written roles so that strong actors could allow him to focus on the visual style.
Before Scott was brought on, it was like, all right, we've got a pretty like average cast, no one's really specific, it doesn't really matter gender. And then like talk started going around. I believe it was, Alan Ladd, who suggested they have like a woman as a part of the team, just one woman. And then they're like, okay, well, having pretty women as main characters is pretty cliche for horror movies at the time. So like they didn't want to do that at all. They kind of really wanted to stay away from that. But after a while of talking about it and sending things around to studios, someone was like, yo, let's like make the hero a woman. And they're like, okay, but like the hero, I don't know if we should have the hero. Maybe it's more of a survivor. And that's where kind of the idea of Ridley kind of came together, is the lone survivor, not necessarily the hero, and having it become a woman. So even when our love and joy Sigourney Weaver was auditioning for this role, she didn't even really think this was going to be a big part. She thought she was just going to be, it was just some sort of, side part in the crew. Even throughout like being casted for it, didn't realize that that role was going to be pretty much the main protagonist of the entire film.
It's a fascinating journey, because as the film plays out, from the very outset, there is this sort of dichotomy in the story, and it's well worth discussing over whether Alien is playing out as a prolonged metaphor for labor or is playing out as a prolonged female empowerment metaphor, because both have had a real influence on the original entry into the series, obviously, but have also played in various different sequels and various different properties in the Alien series. One side of that has been played up more than the other, and I feel like Alien is the one that really balances that in tandem. And we start to see that at the beginning of these character journeys. It's something that we had not noticed in previous viewings, but came out when we watched this together the other day, was that the very first dialogue in the film is a labor dispute. It's Yaphet Kotto's character Parker and Harry Dean Stanton's character Brett are both talking about how they do not feel that they are getting their due for being on this project. They don't feel their shares are not as big as the rest of the crew while they're doing all of the maintenance and nitty-gritty work of the ship. And Tom Skerritt's Dallas character, the captain of the ship, is very much taking the company line.
Oh, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head there, that start of the scene. Like the first time you hear anybody say anything, it's our boys chilling down there. They wake up from their slumber and they don't get to eat right away. They have to go check all the systems. Like, come on. Like get to work, man. No leisure. Not even food is worth it. It definitely, in the lore and the grand scheme of the alien universe, because I am that person. I am an alien anthology stan. I love what it creates when we kind of start to learn about the corporate presence and the differences between those two kind of factions. And then you throw in women in the workplace, and it's like, wow. Here we go. All of this is really interesting. This makes a lot of sense. I feel like it really sets an interesting pace and tone, like with the story as you start there from there, and kind of seeing the different characters unfold. I think the character that stands out to me the most, I know we'll get into this, is Ash, the robo android, who is probably the biggest twist I've ever seen in a movie, which is weird.
And it really comes back to the way that O'Bannon wrote or intended the original script to be cast, is that he really did describe it as unisex. He didn't go into great detail over who he wanted to play what part. His real vibe was making sure that they had strong actors so he could work on the visual aesthetic, because he felt that was going to be key to telling the story. But I think the focus on Ash is really interesting early on, because something you had noticed is that he is really, before the dynamics of the labor disputes and before the politics of Alien and the crew of the Nostromo really play out, Ash is kind of the low guy on the totem pole to start the film.
Absolutely. The scene specifically that I started to notice, I see them as lore bits and you see them as technical aspects, which I love. For me, is like, all right, how do we know he's a robo? When's the first signs? And it's when he comes back, he's in somebody's seat. Who was it that came back to take his seat?
It was Parker, Yaphet Kotto.
Parker. Yes, Parker comes back. He's like, hey, yo, tries to be all nice, but you could tell it's kind of condescending. It's like, yo, you're in my seat. And you're wondering why the lowliest workers here has a place at the table, but this person doesn't. And that's just like a way of setting the tone there, I feel, of just like the stratification of the classes just on the very ship.
And it's poignant that it's Yaphet Kotto, the actor, doing it, because he had been very deeply involved with the blaxploitation scene in the 70s, to the point where in what I consider the blaxploitation Bond film, Live and Let Die, he is cast as the principal villain, Kananga. So Yaphet Kotto had a very strong cultural consciousness that would have shown him the relevance of what he did early on in the movie, because he had those racial issues in the forefront of his mind based off of his own creative work. And so it's very interesting to see the way that subtle underwriting is done earlier, is that, it's using the racial tensions of the time to show that somebody can be even lower in this hierarchy.
Oh, yeah. And me, on someone who's like, oh, my God, but world building is like, OK, well, what does that mean? So for me, my lens of future knowledge of seeing the film on many occasions, I'm like, when is the next time this guy outs himself? When is the next time we see those differences in the labor class or those who are in the corporate side? And it's very interesting, the little gems that the film kind of gives you that you don't really catch on your first viewing.
Oh, 100%. And it's so interesting to focus on Ash as a character, because his journey as a villain, for at very least the first 45 minutes of the film to the first hour, is quite consequential in the way in which the story develops. And in his gaining more power, things do end up becoming more chaotic. One thing that really sticks out to me is that he always represented corporate power to me because of the way he begins to override good practices and good decisions.
Oh, totally. That's the first scene.
Oh, absolutely. But in getting to sort of where he subverts and he twists things to start to become truly villainous, I feel like his most important scene might be quarantine scene when Dallas and Lambert are trying to bring Kane with the facehugger on.
Came back in.
Yes,
right. I was just about to say that. That's exactly the moment. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, we are right here, guys. We didn't write this down, okay? That's the part we actually didn't write that down.
Well, what is it about this scene in particular that really sticks out to you personally?
For me, it's like the smartest goddamn thing anyone has said by far. Is like Ridley's like, don't let him in. This is procedure. Like, don't let them in. We have quarantine procedure. You know this. This is a basic protocol. Like, this is literally number one in training. And everyone's like saying, nah, just let her in. Like, it's not the craziest thing you've ever seen. Like, context, sidebar. I'm about to go on a little tangent, but sidebar. You're doing your daily job. You get a ping. You pull up to a planet to deal with a distress signal. You get to the distress signal. Some creature attaches to your face, and you think it's fine to just let them on the ship? Like, come on.
You're able to point out the logic immediately. You'd like to believe any rational person is able to point this logic out immediately, but this is kind of where the issues for women and women being taken seriously in the workplace start to crop up in the film in a very pronounced way. Now, earlier on, the first real interaction we see between male and female crew members is when Ripley goes down after they've landed on the planet to check on the repairs process, and is largely being derided by both Parker and Brett because, it's like, what is she going to do when she gets down here? It's a very challenging, very brusque sort of treatment of women, but it is also, at the time and still to this day, kind of a casual way in which women are disregarded in the workplace, but it's very prototypical. It's not out of the ordinary, and it's not really, there are no stakes to this, but it does establish to you that there is that tension in this workplace, the same as it is in your workplace. And the problems only really begin when the female characters are not directly listened to. When they are on the alien spaceship right before they find the eggs, Lambert very quietly suggests we should get out of here now.
Get out of here. Yeah, I have that quote written down. Yo, she was the first person, man. Let's get out of here. No, let's not listen to the woman in the back. Like, nah, all right, you get a face hugger. Go ahead. Like,
well, I mean, it's funny. It's genuinely funny, but it's the reaction to her saying that in the film is that both Dallas and Kane, Tom Skerritt and William Hurt's characters, just look at her in silence for a second and then just continue doing what they're doing. It's a complete disregard. And then, boom, Kane ends up getting face hugged. But then that takes us to this quarantine scene, which is a really pivotal moment in the script, as it turns out, because Ripley is, she's running the ship because she is the de facto authority while the captain and the XO are off exploring the planet. So she is using the by-the-book rules and regulations of the company to say, I can't let you in. We're following science directives. We are going to leave you in a 24-hour quarantine because we have encountered an unknown. And all she gets from that is from people who are very emphatic early in the film about keeping to rules and procedures, the pay structure of the company, are suddenly completely distraught and want to disregard any and all best practices purely as an aspect of self-preservation. And if that involves sort of second-guessing Ridley and countenancing her even on her best advice, that's something they're willing to do.
The part that gets me, okay, and this is probably going to bring it first full circle, but the part that gets me is like, bro, you are a robot. Ash is chilling there at the button. I'm like, you are a robot. Like, how your AI-ness is overriding this. Like, that's why I was like, knew something was up. I'm like, why are you defying orders? If you are a product of the company, you know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, that's the thing, is that we don't really know at this point that Ash is what he is. It's very reliant upon that twist in the third, or late in the second act, I would say, when we find out he's an android. But it is a very robotic, very cold response that he gives.
It's like, yes, let him in, no hesitation, boom. Like, as soon, like, she's like, no, Ridley's like double downing, like, on like, yes, queen, tell them no, suck it to him. And then boom, Ash hits that button. I'm like, welp, ripperoni, like, that's it. Like, let's take priority. What is so important? Is it the lives? Like, it gets you thinking, like, is it the people or is it something else?
And again, it's a place where the ideas of, drawn out labor metaphors and drawn out metaphors for female empowerment really intermingle very strongly within the script. Is that it is an assertion of corporate authority and corporate preference over the individual sound advice and sound leadership of a female leader. It is the structure of the film balking at Ridley's attempts to be emphatic. And to this point, in fact, Ridley has had, I would argue, less screen time than Lambert, who is portrayed very much in the film as a foil to Ripley throughout in her actions. As I seem to remember, as they're getting ready to go out and investigate the planet, she does not volunteer to go with Dallas and Kane. She is volunteered.
Yes, they're like, you're coming with. It's like, oh, thanks. But then contrary to that, then Ridley, when stuff does start hitting the fan and they want to send someone out there, she's the first person who's like, all right, let's go. Like, take me out.
That's right. That is very true. Is that their actions on the alien planet really are what set them up as direct opposites. Is that you see Lambert is sort of the woman in the workplace who has been cowed by the workplace culture and has to give into it to get out of it what she wants, which is just the ability to support herself. Ripley seems to see this as an opportunity to assert herself, to get good ideas out to her colleagues, and to be an assertive force. And to this point, neither is really reacted to in a very strong way other than rebuke. But Veronica Cartwright's character, Lambert, is much less rebuked early on. But this all changes when Kane wakes up and the crew decides they're going to have one last meal before they go back into hypersleep.
You know, honestly, I think this is a great moment of the story where we can like easily just kind of transition into like some of the technical aspects about this film, because that food scene is really probably one of the most iconic film like scenes in history. Just one.
Certainly top 10.
Top 10 for sure. But the story behind it, and this is the scene, right, guys, where they're all at the table, you know, and it's the boom from the chest, the I'm gonna come get you. The worst scene ever. I jump scare every time, even though I know it's coming. Yeah, that one. That's the scene. Did you know they didn't tell the people what was gonna happen? I don't think that would fly nowadays, though.
They didn't say a word, but like Sigourney Weaver in particular has been very emphatic about this in interviews and in post-analysis. In fact, I think even a couple of years ago, she was on the Graham Norton show in the UK, and she was emphatic that this was the way it went down, is that they came in and they saw that, you know, William Hurt was set up on the table and was set up in his position. But they didn't know anything that was going to happen after that. They just knew that he was going to get violently ill and die, because that's what the script called for. But they didn't know how the alien itself was going to play into this. And so when the practical effects began to come into play here, it was as shocking to the actors as it was to the people watching it. In fact, you can see it on Veronica Cartwright's face and in her initial reactions to it. It's ever so subtle, but she briefly drops character because she's genuinely freaked out. And there was real shock and surprise on the faces of the other actors as Kane has his chest literally burst and gives birth to the alien.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy because they use like apparently crazy food items. I heard like weird like hearts and livers and stuff, and like it was actual like things that probably had smell. So like, can you just imagine just like spewing everywhere at what like unrehearsed time, right? Like as someone who's done a little acting, I'm sitting there imagining pulling up on set and then they're like, all right, cool. And action. You're like, okay, oh my gosh, don't die. Oh my gosh. Thing bursts out of his chest, blood, guts flying at my face. I don't even know how I'd stay in character. So like the rawness of that scene, let alone like kind of what we were talking about, how it sets up pretty much the entire tonal shift of the film, is just a beautiful moment in itself, I feel, in Alien, and one of the best moments I think from the film.
Well, it's interesting because it's very Shakespearean in its execution, specifically Romeo and Juliet. Because if you remember, in Romeo and Juliet, that is very much a comedy right until the moment in the third act when Mercutio gets slain, and then it's clear, because Shakespeare never kills anybody during comedies, that it's a tragedy. Is this really is the comic tragic shift? Is nobody has died? There has been a little bit of suffering and a little bit of intrigue because Kane got face hugged, and they do not know what that creature is or was. But there is no death. There is no real actual suffering in terms of loss of life until this very moment. And it's even something that the characters themselves in the progression of the film don't take that seriously. In fact, it takes until the second death of Brett when he's looking for Jonesy, the cat. It takes until his disappearance and that experience of him being basically grabbed by the alien and dragged up into the vents of the ship for the crew to really understand that things have changed now and they need to be operating on a crisis response to the threat that they now face.
Do you think that's maybe because he was like one of the working class, like finally one of them was affected? Like, the first death is a little detached, maybe a little bit. I'm not sure though.
Well, there's probably something to that. Is that, again, this is a place where the real metaphors about the female experience and about labor are coming together again, because there is a post-analysis that exists around the world of Alien that the Xenomorph, the alien character created by H.R. Geiger, is representative not necessarily just of a monster, but in recent years it has come to be understood and accepted in a lot of critical circles as a metaphor for rape and sexual assault. And so the way that Harry Dean Stanton's character gets killed plays out eerily the way that you hear sexual assaults reported in dialogue. Is you have witnesses who give an account of what they saw, but who are ultimately powerless. You have Jonesy the cat.
Oh, Jonesy the bystander. Poor Jonesy.
Watching and engaging in their own self-preservation while this horrible thing is happening to someone there. But you bring up a really good point about the fact that it is the after the XO, after one of the supposed authorities is the first to go, the next person to go immediately is the rank and file, is a member of the working class, and that kind of unites the rest of the sort of more lowly people on the ship into action.
Kind of going off of what you're saying after that scene, like there are a lot of other moments in there that are just like uncannily very much like, this is rape. And like, I know for some people that might be a little cringy to think about, but like for me, I really enjoy kind of like seeing that interpretation. And that's why I appreciate what you have to say about that. That connection there and that representation is, it really is uncanny. The specifics on how people die, how they get got, as I would say. Even when our last two lovely foils die at the end there, right before Ridley is by herself, it is kind of unsettling how the alien just pulls up in the dark alley there, takes out the last two people that really, finally find their voice. Even there, and I'm skipping around too because there are so many. Like we skip past the scene with Ash there too, which is just very, very symbolic. I mean, he's trying to shove a rolled like newspaper roll down Ridley's throat and just suffocate her. It's insane. Like to say that that's not not uncanny to a lot of situations of sexual assault. Like it would be an injustice to say that illusion is not there. So I definitely think it's prevalent throughout the film.
It really is, and it is a tough subject to approach. But I think that Alien succeeds in doing it because, especially in the creation of the creature, it goes beyond just, the act of murder or the act of being, of dying in a gruesome way, which we see all the time in horror. But the way that the deaths carry out an Alien with the penetration of the tongue, with the way in which, towards the end of the film, as you mentioned, when both Parker and Lambert die, the way that you don't see it murder Lambert, you just see it wrap itself around her and oozing and dripping all over her. It's meant to create this air of real disgust around what is happening to these people. And it becomes more and more tragic, as you mentioned, the more that people die, because the people who are dying later in the film, the people who are leaving Ripley alone, are the ones who are able to adapt the most, who find their voice despite the corporate hierarchy, and find the means of trying to be self-sufficient and bringing each other together, even if it's against the company directives. And that is what brings Ash back into play.
Oh my gosh, I'm gushing over Ash. Sorry. Ash is like the character for me. It's so interesting. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go off on it again. But this like whole twist, like you would think it's a horror film, and then they throw in such a spicy, like corporate sci-fi twist. Like our derivative was never to like, even care about you. Like crew expendable. Like once we have that scene, the one safe space that Ridley has, right, in Mother, and she's finding out like what's the case, why has everything been so fishy, why was no one listening to me, or why does none of this matter. We find out here that the company said we need to bring back this specimen, and honestly that's kind of just the worst thing you could possibly hear, is like you're expendable, like you don't matter, your existence is meaningless. And especially coming from, right, the technology that we've seen, right, the android that was considered the bottom of the barrel is now having all this power given to him from authority and clearly abusing it, in like a playful manner too. He's very intrigued about things. He's very like, oh, this is fun, I'm just not even someone following the rules. It sounds like he's genuinely like participating in this kind of action, which makes him being an android a little unsettling when we do find that out when he gets decapitated. I think like that whole moment in the discovery of Ash being an android is just very interesting on the sci-fi level.
It's funny because he's almost on a leash right up until the moment Dallas dies in the vents. And whereas you're somebody who's really interested in Ash as a secondary character to Ripley's journey in the film, I find Dallas fascinating. As the captain of the ship, like, this is not a military hierarchy. Weyland-Yutani is not a militaristic corporation. They operate off of their own rules and reg, but it's an informal civilian organization at its core. And yet, Tom Skerritt runs the ship very militarily. He does so, first off, from the very opening scene, by rebuking Parker and Brett's pay dispute. Is that, he says, you make what the company tells you to make. When the Facehugger is brought on board the ship and he lets the science officer make the call on keeping the Facehugger, when Ridley questions that, Dallas immediately rebukes her by talking about the company and talking about responsibility. And you realize in that moment that this man is stuck in his position, is that he only really knows how to move forward, how to do things by the structure that he is given. And it is, in one of, I think, the most interesting metaphors in the film, what ends up getting him killed.
Yes.
Because he doesn't die having to run around the ship figuring out various things. He doesn't get jumped from behind and caught unawares the way Harry Dean Stanton is and the way that the threat presents itself. No, he dies because he is trying to go on that straight and narrow through the vents, and the alien is the only thing there in front of him, and he cannot get past it because he cannot adapt to his new reality. So it's weird to say, because the alien obviously kills him in the film, but it's as though this metaphor, this journey that he is on, is what ends up killing him from the word go. And I think that's just an unbelievable touch, because the moment he dies is the moment when Ash is really allowed to run rampant with his programming towards corporate authority.
Yeah, the facade is gone after that, right? Like Ash is like, well, it doesn't matter now. And it's kind of sad when Dallas does leave, because you are right. Like they put him in this confined space, right? They tie him up like real tight. Probably one of the more anxious scenes, maybe only because I'm traumatized from Alien Isolation. However, comma, I definitely see what you're saying there. The straight and narrow. He doesn't turn around, really. He can only go forward. There's no other option when, like, there was plan A, right? Like there were plans laid up before this plan to go into the ducks and deal with the alien this way. So I find it very interesting, and I definitely think it was intentional for these characters to kind of have these very interesting ideologies and see them kind of come to life when the conflict does start to really like get to them. And even to the last moment, you don't really see him like crack. Like I don't think he ever breaks, he's very like true to his character, which I think we don't see a lot of nowadays.
He has only one real moment of reluctance where he says, where he's talking to Lambert, who is viewing his progress through the vents, he says to her, get me the hell out of here. And that's his only real moment of reluctance and hesitation. And it's the one moment where you don't know where the alien is because it's disappeared off of radar. It's this one moment of unknown and consternation that he has deeply unsettles him. And I don't know. I just think that it's a part that is easy to forget because of just how magnetic Ripley is, how magnetic Ash is in telling the story as a principal protagonist and a principal antagonist, even though there's a lot to argue about whether the Xenomorph or Ash is the true villain here at the end of the day. That he is on this journey underneath their more notable journeys almost is something that I've always thought never got a lot of credit because it's a very smartly written part. And the aesthetics of the film really give it the kind of payoff that you need. Like his death makes sense. Because Ash's death is one, and you have hinted around a little bit. It was like we should just allow ourselves now to take a deep dive into that scene because it, in the same way that William Hurt's death from the chest burster really changes the tone for the second half of the film, the death of Ash really does change things and create that perceptible shift into the final act of the film.
Yeah, I was about to say acts. It definitely made them whole acts for sure.
And what it is it's funny because you hinted at it a little bit before, is that, Ripley having to fight back against what plays out very closely and very literally like a sexual assault. And the crew that had been bystanders to the death of Brett were now actively helping her fight against this assault. So you're seeing the birth of individuality in these people, but you're seeing this mighty pushback by the corporate structure they're a part of ultimately fail. And it is that failure that kind of gives Ripley the ability to finally be the full person we know her as, and we see her as an archetype to this day. But until Ash was really fought off, she was not in a real position to be powerful.
Absolutely. It's all like, I say this with the nicest way possible. They snuffed her for more than half the film. Jesus, her character was very much under the radar, and I know I've read that a lot of it was intentional. They definitely wanted it to be unsuspecting who the star of the film was going to be. A lot of the times they were very much intentional with that, making Dallas such a prominent character, having such authority even then when shit is hitting the fan. And then finally when you get to this scene that we're talking about here, where we finally get those corporate shackles removed, we actually do see really become the character we love and adore. But it takes some trauma. My God, does it take trauma to get there?
It really does. And it's interesting because his Ian Holm, Ash's attack really only comes after her first real assertion of true authority. Is I'm in charge of the ship now that Dallas is dead. I'm going to find out from Mother, their computer system on the ship. I'm going to find out from Mother what's going on because I'm the authority now. And it's only then when she's inured to the truth, crew expendable, that she really gets involved in this very heated conflict with Ash, who is the representation of the cold corporate structure of Weyland-Yutani on the Nostromo.
My personal favorite scene of the film is that end sequence, which never seems to end, my God, which sucks because there's probably 2 end sequences, so maybe I should dial it back. But I think the blow up the ship plan B, when that starts to enact, right? I think that scene, just sidebar, probably one of the most well-executed moments of tension and anger, as you said, Shaq. It's not just fear and anxiety, but also anger that fuels everything in that last scene there, trying to escape from the main ship.
I'm very glad that you reminded me of that because it first off, you're absolutely right that the tension is just absolutely palpable in this scene, and it's done through something that is used throughout the film, which is that there's a very interesting and wonderful use of camera and perspective throughout Alien. Is that a lot of the shots are handheld or are POV even, meant to be actually you living the character's experience. And so right from the beginning, when you're literally right from the opening shots in the Nostromo, when you are getting a little tour through the decks, you feel as though you are watching the crew as something. Like you're given this sense that you are watching the crew, or that you are being watched when these POV shots happen. It happens again in the scene after the facehugger gets off of Kane, and they're looking for it in the abandoned med bay.
Oh, right, and the camera's like on the ground there, right? And that weird freaky angle.
Yeah, they literally bring you in at a low shot because the facehugger is a small creature, and it's almost as though they want you to believe that the facehugger is going to jump out at one of these characters. So camera work is really used to build the tension, and so it's no surprise that the predominant use of handheld shots happens in this scene when she's trying to blow up the ship. There are some composed shots, as they are necessary because you need inserts and you need practical things to lead people through a film. But in traveling through the ship, in viewing the dead bodies of Parker and Lambert, in moving back and forth between the escape pod and the destruct sequence because the alien is there, you get this really very personal, very close-in focus on Ripley and on her actions, and it is a perfect way to build the tension there.
Oh, absolutely. I think the part that like reminds me when you say that the handheld, the POV is like she does 2 takes, right? So I'm gonna walk through the scene real quick, right? So she's like, we got to self-destruct, we got to do all these intricate levels. She's turning them all. Good, we're good, all packed up, ready to go. Like she'd been waiting, right? Like that was her job. So she goes, checks on everything. They're dead. Oh my God. Goes and gets ready to leave and sees that the alien is right where like she needs to be. Right. So what are you going to do? Right. So that anger you're saying, that's where I think the anger shows the most. Where she's like, God damn it. Now she's got to run back. She's like, God damn it. I can't blow up the ship if I can't even get in the ship like escape pod. So she's running back, and that's where you see that shaky cam, like the cam that was following over her shoulder all of a sudden is just frantically sprinting down the hallway with her. And I'm like, oh my God, like is the alien behind her? Like where is it? Like, like you're in that moment, and the camera work, the scene, like everything about the way it is filmed really just like executes that emotion of that situation just so well.
It's a beautiful way to build to a traditional climax in a film as well, is that it really shows you just how focused they were on the visual style of this film. Like one thing we haven't really gotten into yet is that the way that the set was built and the way the set was designed was deliberately to be claustrophobic, because each of the different 3 decks of the Nostromo was constructed on a different soundstage, and tunnels were actually built to connect the different sound stations and different decks so that the crew had added claustrophobia in the experience. So the environment was literally built to give you this tense feeling of, being stuck somewhere enclosed with something truly horrible, as that was a real necessity in the creative process and in the set design. And that was one of those things that really aided to that, and I think is what aided to her anger and her focus in that scene, is that her adrenaline almost took over in such a way that this frantic nature was going on. But the more she went and the more she allowed herself to be, I guess, sort of dulled to her own feelings, the more her anger focuses her, and the more the process of escaping the ship comes into focus despite the chaos of doing so.
Oh yeah, and then I think the tension, and here what it is like you build it up to this climax, like we were saying, and the tension doesn't actually go away. I remember we were finishing the film, and we both agreed that we couldn't breathe literally until the last audio recording, where she's like, this is signing off, and then you can finally breathe. Then.
Ridley Scott and Dan O'Bannon, in constructing the film's story, did something very, I think, insidious, is that they do give you a moment to breathe when the Nostromo is about to blow up. Is that right before the nuclear fire hits the ship and it has its huge explosion to what you think at the time is the cap of the film, there is this moment where she finally gets out from underneath it and she drifts off into space, and you're allowed to hear the vacuum of space, or at least their audio interpretation of it. And ultimately, because you're given that breath, they give you this chance to breathe because she's escaped where the alien was. She even says, "Got you." But as we know, if from watching the film, they constructed what they refer to as a 4th act for the very end of the film.
It was a debate ending. The original debate is alien, guys. You were super debated. You thought the alien was gone. And you know what? A lot of people were like, I like that it was there. And I'm like, but you saw, where did it go? It's smart. Like, that was my key sign of intelligence, was seeing the alien. I heard a lot of people, they're like, oh, of course, Deus Ex alien's still on the ship with her, right? And I'm like, think about it, though. We done saw the alien on the ship. She ran away, came back. Like, you think the alien followed her? Like, no. Like, this alien's got to know stuff's blowing up. Like, let's go in a spot where things aren't blowing up. There's fire everywhere, you know. We finally get up. Aliens, like, hitchhike a ride inside the goddamn wall. That scene, which scares the living shit out of me, is he's literally in the pipes. He looks like a goddamn part of the set.
And it's funny is that it's a very poignant moment too, because it is, and we pointed this out too, is that the alien only shows up on the ship and makes its presence known in the escape pod when Ripley is literally at her most vulnerable she's been in the entire script.
Oh my God, yes!
She's literally stripped down to her underwear and is getting ready to put herself to sleep when the alien's hand thrusts out of nowhere and really throws her for a loop. And it fits again into what we've talked about the Xenomorph being a direct metaphor for sexual assault, is that Ripley has made herself clear throughout this film as a deeply powerful, very driven woman. Because of that, this literal sexual predator is only able to truly go after her when she is at her most vulnerable. And it creates a situation where she has to have, in a very sharp way, have her fight or flight response react to give herself the ability to continue to exist, because the alien is coming for her.
Just a sign of the type of character they created with Ridley. I see how strong and powerful she is. Like, you know, anyone in that situation, as vulnerable as she is in that last scene, could easily, you know, one, scream and be screwed, right? Like, just one amount of times we've seen really throughout the film not scream. I just have to put that out there. Kudos to you, sis. I don't know how you did it. Two, though, to be smart enough, level-headed enough in that fear, because you can tell there's emotion in that moment. It's not like she's detached. It's not like, you know, she's traumatized into being frantic, but making a rational decision on and executing a plan without hesitation. Like, there was barely room for hesitation in any of those moments in the escape pod there, and being able to go, like we said, into that separate room and put on her armor.
Yeah, it's literally the first action she takes in saving herself is to steel herself, is to like accept her circumstances and to understand that she has to fight against them. It's a very subtle but very poignant moment, and it requires her, in what may be the scariest moment of the film, it requires her to get in close proximity with her potential murderer, her potential abuser. It requires her to get in very close proximity in order to finally lay the alien to rest.
Oh my gosh, not even close proximity. I didn't even realize until our viewing of the film that she literally uses herself as bait.
Yes.
Like, oh my God, like, I used to think that scene was just, oh, she's using the gas to just get him out, and she's just gassing the whole thing. I didn't realize, like, she was gassing in her direction, directly facing, you know, the door. Like, there was a reason why she was sitting in the chair facing the way she was, you know, and having to sing the "You Are Lucky Star" the whole time.
Bringing in the alien in a weird way, almost with promises of promiscuity, because it's a very breathy, very like nervous way of her singing it. It's like it's weirdly alluring. Like, she really is trying to bait the Xenomorph to the specific spot she needs it to kill it.
I thought that was so crazy, because I can't believe, I guess maybe I was so caught up in the hoopla, the like 7 other times I've seen this, I never, like, you know, you never notice little nuances like that. But then when we're talking about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, she literally baited herself. Like, wow, like that metaphor is very strong in this film. And I definitely think it's hard to say, and it's hard to say it's unintentional.
Well, it's funny because it's very hard to say it's unintentional, but it's also, you do recognize that it came about as an interpretation in post-analysis.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think there is something to be said, and I think Alien's a good test case for it, for post-analysis that holds a lot of relevance for the art that you're seeing. And I think Alien, very least in the way that the story plays out, I think ultimately that metaphor becomes just as strong as the larger corporate story they're telling about the ways in which the individual has to act for themselves in order to survive a difficult situation, in order to survive their problems. Is they can't rely on that corporate structure they have. They can't rely on their place in the hierarchy. They have to rely on themselves and their own free thought. And so it makes for a very interesting story and a very interesting way of discussing these metaphors that are baked deeply within the script, to know that certain of them were clearly intended at the time of writing, and some of them clearly came about because of the way in which people reacted to this film. And boy, did they react at the time. Is the story? It was a commercial success, which is for a film that was largely derided by the studios as it was being shopped and as it was being made, because again, there was no frame of reference for A-level sci-fi like this other than Star Wars. It gripped something about the population, and in fact, it was one of the most successful films in the early era of home video as well. It was just, there's something about it that really connects with people, and I think it's because of the deep meaning that can be put on the film, both in its making and after it's been viewed. And I think that one of the things that adds to that as well, and adds to the conflict and adds to that air of opposition, is what they did in terms of the design aesthetics for the film. Is that, for those of you who are not familiar with the artist H.R. Giger, his handprints are all over this design, and for good reason.
Oh, yes.
And I know you, BK, are someone who reacts very strongly to his work. Is that you were one of the first people I talked to about this film who really emphasized the juxtaposition of these, very human, very sort of normal forms with the technology and the industrial nature of the set.
Yeah, the whole theme, like I can't get into technical stuff. I can only talk about how I feel, how something resonates with me. But it was the colors for me.
I will say is that you may only be able to gush about it, but one of us did not have to spend an exorbitant amount of money to go to film school. So who's the real smart one here?
Oh man, debatable.
For
me, it was really the colors. I remember you were like, wait, hold off, save it for the podcast, when I was talking about it last night. It's just the tones, like it's not just blacks and whites. There's this weird multicolor of shades that this guy uses in like all of the set. And it's like, it ranges from white, like there's 5 different types of white, black, grays, and then the little bits of color we do see, like, always stand out. So certain scenes, like aka the blood, things like that are dramatic like that. The cat stands out because he's a tabby. Like anything that has color, the lights, those things always seem so like, different, and they stand out, which for me sets a very interesting tone. It puts me in a weird headspace as someone who like resonates with colors, and I think it shapes how I experience the whole film, like down to how it's designed.
And that is a big factor in what is referred to as Giger-esque in art. Is Giger was a Swiss-born artist who he became very known. He had an early fascination with skulls and with basically trying to get his nightmares onto paper so his nightmares wouldn't have as bad of an effect on him. And he, throughout his life, was very, very focused on doing his art in grayscale. His art is all blacks and whites if you go and look at it, particularly the book of art that he created that is arguably the genesis for Alien style, called Necronomicon, literally named after the Lovecraft book. But he released Necronomicon in 1976, and it's significant not just because it created the sort of the design base for what would become Alien, but because it was really he who pioneered the technique of airbrushing as a legitimate art form. Is Giger's airbrushing and his use of grayscale are all over this film because of the way that he would constantly experiment with combining natural and technical elements. Is that his work is full of stuff like heads being hooked up to wires, or like alien creatures being put inside of, like very kind of, brutalist, very human designed environments. And it's because of Geiger's fascination with this that Ridley Scott found the aesthetic. Is the famous story about it is that Dan O'Bannon showed Ridley Scott Necronomicon, and Ridley Scott said, "I've never been so sure of anything in my life as I was that this man needed to be involved with this film." And Geiger was hugely influential for a long time, and he started to even getting back to the set design. He started out his career as an interior designer.
Oh my gosh. I'm looking at these buildings. So sorry. Holy cow. Like bones for the ceiling? Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, no. Geiger was very into that kind of occult, very fringe imagery. And it even, resulted, late in his life, he came full circle, and he even had Geiger rooms in certain places, including New York's now defunct Club Limelight had a Geiger room in it. But his style was so influential and spoke to people, I believe, because he found something beautiful in what is disturbing. And I think that really is a huge influence on the Xenomorph, because the Xenomorph is a creepy, disgusting, horrifying, oozing creature. Like, oozing is the perfect word for it because it literally drips throughout the film. But at the same time, it is very smooth. It is the anatomy is in an odd way beautiful. In the design of the alien, you see the same struggle between natural and technical as you've seen throughout the design of the film. And it's really interesting to see how his work really impacts this.
I'm fascinated. Now I need to dive into this Necronomica stuff now, because you put me on, Jack. That's what's up.
I do what I can.
It's so cool. And I'm looking at it now and I'm like, oh my gosh, the whole alien anthology just was let's just double down. Let's still pull from this. Let's make it true to this. It's
100%. And it's good. It's a good thing to talk about the influence of Geiger on this film, because his work and Alien as a piece of culture has become one of the most significant properties, one of the most significant artistic endeavors of the 20th century and of American culture. Is the alien is ubiquitous now. Its themes are ubiquitous now.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think now, because of this film here, it's staple. It's literally epitome, because I love it. I'll say it's epitome, but it really set the bar there of being able to create a world so well done in that time, especially with the elements like we talk about, how it being sci-fi, how it's being horror, these genres that often don't make new worlds, right? They don't, it's usually just a moment in time. Alien really created a whole universe, essentially, and then establishing one of the most iconic monster villains of our history. Absolutely. I mean, how many spin-offs do we have with this thing?
Very true. The Xenomorph is one of the most frequently cited designs of all aliens, and it's nice in a way to know that Dan O'Bannon, when he wrote the script, was stealing from everything he could sci-fi, because it almost in a way makes it okay to use the Xenomorph as that kind of reference, because it's carrying on in that spirit of just wanting to do, at its very core, wanting to do sci-fi and do it seriously. And sci-fi horror, as you mentioned, this was Genesis. Before this point, the closest you could get to real sci-fi horror would be Andrei Tarkovsky's 1972 film Solaris. But even that in Tarkovsky's style is very much more ruminative, and it's more of a thriller. It's more, it's more cerebral than it is overtly scary. Alien goes into a territory where it is both scary in the presence of the very elements that you want, that the director and the creatives want to scare you with, but it's also scary in the absence there. And that emptiness is something that you see portrayed a lot in film. And while Alien arguably owes a lot of that sense of emptiness to 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien kind of popularized that and broadened that beyond what is a very cerebral film in 2001. And I think that kind of gets to the crux of it, is that Alien was a very intelligent film, but it was also very accessible.
Accessible is the word, right? It wasn't too niche. You know, the sci-fi elements, yes, they're in space, but once you got into the crew, it felt like, you know, like a ship, naval almost, you know, very, you know, militaristic in a sense, how we talked about that. So I feel like people could resonate with like the theme in a different way that might be outside of space, and also like the characters. Like we said, we've went off on like 4 or 5 different characters that kind of really have different angles and perspectives of the story that are easy to kind of attach to and be intrigued by. So doing that, being accessible, and then really honestly, like I said, just establishing that genre, like that world. I can't stress that enough. I think if it didn't accomplish that that world building in a single film as well as it did, I don't think we'd have the works after, let alone it have nearly as much as a cultural impact. Sure, it would be within the film industry as something phenomenal, but for us nerds and us geeks, like this film is like the spawn of so many video games, so many series, like outside of movies. So I can't even, my rating for this film, let me tell you, like it has to be a 10 out of 10. I hate to do it. I really hate to do it. I don't like giving them out willy-nilly, but BK's stars, 10 out of 10 here for
Wow, 10 of 10. That's a pretty hefty rating for that. I will say that I tend to this is one of my favorite films of all time. I tend to rate it very highly as well. I'm gonna save my 10.
You're gonna save your 10. Okay.
I'm going to save my 10. I'm going to give this one a 9, and I'll explain why. Because I think that it is a powerful film. You know, if not for its broadness of its cultural impact, certainly for the way in which it became one of the first films in the history of Hollywood to really treat a female protagonist with respect.
Yes.
To build that strong female role in a film. That is the significance of that, and the way in which it has helped women be more represented in genres other than, say, you know, the typical Hollywood romance.
Right.
Like that ability to represent women in much more varying roles, I think, is something critically important to the film. Alien gets a 9 rather than a 10 from me, ultimately because I think a lot of the significance we put on it is stuff that we get in post-analysis, and I think that makes it a very good film. I think the fact that you can have so many interpretations of something that you can discuss it endlessly is one of the things that we all really do love about film. But I think that we love that about film because it points out a certain imperfection to the film that allows us that space to bring our own interpretations upon it. If it was something that was so clearly focused and clearly executed based off of a strict vision, that to me is almost kind of the 10 of 10 criteria. And I know that's super pretentious, but like Alien, in terms of execution, it's executed as a 10 out of 10. I will not take anything away from the filmmaking. I think broadly in terms of its impact is where I take away ever so slightly, because there is so much to focus about what does it really mean. There are filmmakers who do a lot to really make sure that their metaphor is this is specific to this. The open-ended nature of Alien is what has that last little piece to me, is that it's not that the focus is unclear. It's just that I think that the broad level of interpretation opens it up to being criticized a little bit more. And indeed, it was criticized very harshly by critics when it came out. Would you believe the people who one group of people who panned on it were none other than Siskel and Ebert, is they sort of saw it as kind of a middling film. And yet, over the years, Roger Ebert would go on to include it as one of his, in a book of his greatest films of all time, because he respected the cultural significance of it. And that, I think, is where it stands for me, is that it's room for growth, it's room for interpretation. It's slight, ever so slight imperfection is what makes it a great film for us.
Interesting. I'll let it rock. I'll let the rating rock. I'm not going to debate.
It's not like I'm giving it a 6 or something like that. Absolutely.
Exactly. I think for me, a reason why it's a 10 out of 10, probably just pure experiential of one of like the oldest films I've seen in a long time. Like I said earlier at the beginning, I grew up with something like this, so that nostalgia is that extra star. Because I do agree with you, but I'm sitting here and thinking, and I'm like, can I even think of something else I actually would rate as a 10 out of 10? And I think that's why I doubled down and said, you know what, I'm gonna give it the 10. Because I really can't. It means too much to me. Maybe it's because I am a woman. Maybe because I am a woman nerd.
And that could be a big part of it too.
Yeah, it could be it, because really when we talk about, really as the female protagonist, I literally could maybe name on one hand the amount of protagonists that impacted me the way this character impacted me. So that's why it gets that additional star for me there to make it a 10. But I agree with what you have to say. And my two qualms about the film are it's a little slow. I don't like slow films, right? So like it's a little slow. But the payoff is so good in tension and anxiety through there, I think, and the world building really just like hits me hard. And that combination, that synergy there of what they've done, all the elements that we talked about in set design and storytelling, and just having phenomenal actors. Again, I can't stress that enough.
Oh no, the cast is a powerhouse.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I think with that synergy there of what they created and its timeliness in the my life, in my timeline, I can't help but give it 10 out of 10 stars. And if y'all have not seen this movie,
well, for one, spoilers.
I don't know why you're listening. And if you have seen this movie and it's been a while, watch it again. Like, it's one of the few movies I can actually watch multiple times and not be annoyed or not actually find like crazy flaws or continuity issues. Like, I can enjoy it and sometimes even watch certain scenes like it's the first time I've seen the scene before. So please do yourself a favor. It's on HBO Max, all right? # not sponsored. Go watch that. Okay, please. I'll do you a favor.
And I will say, in terms of our ratings, we are absolutely allowed to be preferential. We're not trying to give you some guide of, this is the be-all, end-all of film.
Yes.
I did enough of that kind of pretension in film school to last me a lifetime, so I stick away from it. These ratings, literally, it's about how it strikes us as film nerds, as, real fans of the art form. And so, please, don't take us too seriously. If you see Alien and it is, I can't imagine why, but if for some reason it just ain't your film, that's completely okay. We're doing this, and in large form, we're doing this podcast because we share this love of film analysis and we share this love of doing these deep dives on films, and that's what we hope we're bringing to you guys with this. And so, while Alien is bringing out ever so slightly a difference in us, we'll probably have more difference in some of these films coming up on our schedule.
Oh my gosh, you gotta let the people know what's coming up, though. Come on, Jack, you can't tease them like that.
Well, I can tease them a little bit. I mentioned earlier again that I gush over the 70s in film, and one of the exciting things as our schedule is developing early on, really in our first couple of weeks, we're going to get a deep dive into what I have always personally considered to be the greatest year of film in history, which is 1979. I know there are a lot of people who like to talk about 39. There are a lot of people who like to talk about 75, and there are a lot of people who like to talk about 94. But there are three films in particular that we have from 1979 that have always really spoken to me as a person. Alien is one of those films. Next week, we're getting into the one that it is really, for me personally, a great excitement because it's at the core of who I am as a fan of film and as a lover of film, is we are going to take a deep dive into Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola's film from 1979. Now, I won't give you too much information on it up front. Suffice to say, I'm a fidgeter when I watch movies, BK. I am constantly moving around. I'm constantly, I never really settle down.
Okay.
When I first saw Apocalypse Now, I was lucky enough to see it at the North Carolina School of the Arts in a summer program. They used to have the second largest library of films in the world. of original prints. And so I got to see Apocalypse Now from an original 70 millimeter print from 1979.
Oh my gosh. No way.
Genuinely, still to this day, the greatest film experience I've ever had in my life is for the 2 hours and 45-minute runtime of that film. I was dead still. I was just focused and fixated on the screen. It is a story of. It is one of the most beautiful stories ever put onto film, even if it is one of the hardest to watch because of how horrifying it really is. But it is also, as you'll find out next week, it is the story of the death of New Hollywood in a lot of ways. The making of Apocalypse Now is almost as epic, if not more epic, than the film itself.
Oh my gosh, you gotta stop, Jack. You gotta stop, Jack. I haven't seen it, guys. So like now I'm getting extra giddy. I don't want to know.
I know. I have this habit of being a hype man with these films for you. Is every time I start talking about something, you just get geeked out about it. So
every time.
But yeah, I'll pause for now. But yeah, so next week that is coming down the pipeline, guys. If you've enjoyed this deep dive on Alien, Apocalypse Now will be coming at you next week. I highly recommend seeking it out and watching it. I literally still own it on DVD because physical medium is forever. Yeah, so that is what's in the pipeline. We've got a couple more things that are going to be coming up. We're going to try and keep it under wraps a little bit. What's next until we do an episode, but. Rest assured, we're going all over the place. It will not just be dramatic films. We're going to be looking at some comedies a little bit later. We're going to be looking at some fantasy. We're going to be looking at some, older films.
Oh my gosh, and animations. Don't forget that too.
You will definitely forget the animations. As knowledgeable as I come across with, these live action films and these old classic films because of it being a focus of my life, BK has got me covered on the animation stuff and has thankfully been very adamant and insistent that we get animated films into our rotation on a regular basis, and I couldn't be happier that that's going to be part of the content moving forward as well.
That's what's up. And I'm seriously really excited. So last minute plugs there for you alien heads who still listened this far. I do Alien Isolation on my Twitch on Mondays, where I play this awesome game that does a great ode to this film. I cry, I'm tortured. Everybody shows up. So I implore you to come through there too. For those regulars who are listening, I appreciate you and the support. And I recommend you play the game, Alien Isolation. It takes place 10 years, I believe, after the base films, the trilogy, I guess is what we call it. What's canon enough. But it's a really great work, and I really recommend you guys playing that if you are a fan of the anthology and of the series and want a little taste of what it might be like to be in that situation with the queen at your back. For you video game nerds out there who also like films, we'll be looking out for you for those types of recommends in other episodes, so be sure to make it to the end.
Absolutely. And BK, real quick, where can they find that content?
Hey, they can find that on twitch.tv, BlackKrystel. That's
absolutely. I was about to say, you can tell we're a little bit new at plugs, folks, but we're getting there. And for my part, if you want to see any more content from me as a broadcaster, I do, when things are up and running, train and work professionally as a play-by-play broadcaster for wrestling. I'm a part of the World of Unpredictable Wrestling run by WWE Hall of Famer Johnny Rodz out in Brooklyn, New York.
Ow, ow.
When things are going smoothly and when we, aren't currently in lockdown, we usually have a show going on once every month. You can find us at twitch.tv/WUW Wrestling. Or you can find us on Instagram or Facebook at those same addresses. And you can find my content at Manly Jack Manley on both Twitter and Instagram. It is usually just wrestling and workout posts, but I do get my film and artistic content in there as well. And I think I'll be doing a little bit more of that stuff as well. But so if you want to keep checking us out and see what we're about, we're going to keep providing stuff through those platforms there and elsewhere.
Yes. And this is not the end of Revenge of the Film Nerds. No, it is the very beginning for many more to come. And we are having so much fun doing this. So I hope you guys tune in next time. We will see you next week with some lovely Apocalypse Now.
Yes, indeed. All right, everybody. Peace and chicken grease.
Deuces.